Today, Ben Duncan is going to give us a run through, an introduction to geothermal. Lots in here. I hope you enjoy.
Welcome everyone. Today we're going to be talking about geothermal energy. So the agenda for this talk, we're going to go over the basics of geothermal energy, talk about how it's used for electricity generation globally, and then how it is used for direct heat globally. We're going to look at a timeline of geothermal developments. We'll then explore some case studies in a bit more detail and then look to the future, and we'll finish up with a demonstration of the TROVE geothermal knowledge base. So, geothermal basics. Greek words geo and therme, earth, heat. The earth is very hot in its core, in fact 6,000 degrees Celsius, which is hotter than the surface of the sun. And basically, temperature increases with depth from the surface as you go down. But the range that we're interested in is sort of the first 10 kilometers of depth and up to temperatures of around 500 degrees centigrade. The hottest temperature recorded in any geothermal well is actually 450 degrees C. But looking at the first 10 kilometers of the Earth's crust, we see it's not a linear relationship with temperature getting steadily warmer. It varies from place to place. So the green line on this graph, for example, the Larderello, has a much higher geothermal gradient than, say, the blue line on this graph. But geothermal, it's a sustainable and it's a reliable energy source. And in my opinion, it's the best renewable energy source. It doesn't need any rare earth minerals such as solar. It doesn't require vast amounts of space on the surface such as wind farms, and it's available 24/7. And it can be used both as an electricity source, but also in more places as direct heat utilization, which is key. So we're most common with the Earth being hot when it sort of pops out of the Earth in the form of volcanoes or as hot water and steam and geysers that make excellent tourist attractions here in Iceland. From a report by IRENA on geothermal power published in 2017, they say that geothermal power has considerable potential for growth. The amount of heat within 10 kilometers of the Earth's surface is estimated to contain 50,000 times more energy than all oil and gas resources worldwide, which is, there is just immense potential in geothermal. We're going to take a slight sidestep for a second and talk about energy, because there's a bit of confusion in this area, particularly in the field of geothermal. And so we're going to use Scotland as an example. So energy use in Scotland, this is a graph from 2013 through to 2021, and it shows three energy uses in Scotland. We have electricity, transport, and gas or heating. And you can see that in particular heating fluctuating drastically between winter and summer each year. And electricity doing the same, but being the least of the three energy uses. Just highlighting early 2020, you can see transport really declining. That was first lockdown, of course. And electricity being affected as well by the COVID crisis. But renewables met 97% of Scotland's electricity demand in 2020, which is really incredible. However, that's only part of the energy picture. Scotland's 2030 target is to generate 50% of all of its energy from renewables. And so this is now talking about electricity, heat, and transport all together. And we're approximately at 25% currently. And this is, we have largely decarbonized our electricity, and the potential for reaching this new target for all energy becoming net zero lies in decarbonizing heating and transport. And geothermal has a major role to play in heating. To put it sort of in context, Iceland is the world leader for total energy being supplied by renewables, up at 82%, where they've only really got their transport sector left to decarbonize. So, looking at the uses of geothermal energy, well, the type and scale of geothermal exploitation depends on the natural resources available. So for power generation of electricity, you require high heat resources. And so generally these, you require temperatures of sort of 150 degrees to generate electricity, but even down to 80 degrees centigrade, you can just roughly you need more than 100 degrees. And on this map, it shows the conventional locations for geothermal electricity generation. Basically, it's around volcanic areas of the world, so your subduction zones, your rift valleys, mid-ocean ridges, hotspots, all that good stuff. But the other use of geothermal energy is using it directly as heating. And this is a very efficient form of utilizing the energy because it's not having to convert anything, it's just heat as heat. And this is available in far more areas. In fact, practically everywhere we can utilize geothermal energy as a heat resource. So we're going to focus a little bit more on just geothermal use for electricity generation. This is a map taken from TROVE now, where we've compiled all the geothermal power plants of the world, and they're categorized. And so here they are, capacities compiled by country on this map. You can see that the world leader is the USA in terms of electrical geothermal capacity, followed by Philippines and Indonesia. Iceland, Italy, and New Zealand are some of the historic leaders in the fields of geothermal. Mexico, Kenya, and Japan are some other significant producers. And most recently, in the last 20 years or so, we have Turkey becoming a real key player and really showing that development of this industry can happen rapidly and to significant levels. Grouping these countries together further, we see that Asia and North America are very much leading the way, followed by Europe in terms of capacity. And from looking at TROVE, we see that the global geothermal electricity capacity is around 15 gigawatts. And that's from 350 producing power plants. TROVE also captures a variety of other assets, such as proposed and suspended plants. And our aim has been to capture every geothermal power plant. But increasingly, we are now starting to include deep heating schemes. And that leads us on to the next subject, which is direct use of geothermal, starting with shallow geothermal. And by this, really mean ground source heat pumps. Basically, these is a technology that uses heat exchangers to utilize the steady temperature in the shallow subsurface, and they can be used almost anywhere. There's quite a few different types, and they scale up to being quite significant, but this is an example of a closed loop system, a horizontal, but you also can get open loop systems, and you can get vertical systems, and they don't have to be coiled, used for heating and cooling. China is the world leader in utilizing this technology, followed by the USA. And within Europe, Sweden is leading the way, but it's also a significant heat source in Germany, France, Switzerland, and Austria. And in the UK and Poland currently have the highest numbers of new installations in Europe. And we're based in the UK here, and I've certainly been aware on the news. There were some articles earlier this week on heat pumps, and yeah, you can see the picking up in this country. But TROVE excludes basically geothermal stuff that's below 100 meters, largely because this is not strictly a geothermal resource. It's actually sort of solar radiation that heats the ground up to this sort of level. So we are more interested in the deeper wells and or at least large mine systems that can be used for heating. So what are these larger uses? Well, there's also bathing to mention, and people for centuries have enjoyed jumping into hot water when it's available naturally. But looking at data from the World Geothermal Congress 2020, now 2020 plus one, that's currently ongoing, so a paper from that on global direct use of geothermal shows that space heating, which includes district and individual heating schemes, is used in 29 countries. The leaders for district heating being China, Iceland, Turkey, France, and Germany, and a different set of leaders for individual space heating. Greenhouses, geothermal is used in 32 countries to heat greenhouses, world leaders being Turkey, China, and then the Netherlands. The Netherlands is one of the countries we capture in TROVE. So here's just an example of a greenhouse from the Netherlands powered by geothermal. We have 21 countries use geothermal for heating in agriculture. In agriculture, crop drying is very country specific for the purpose, but 15 countries record this as a use. For industrial process heat, 14 countries use geothermal, and for snow melting, 5 countries use it. And this is basically keeping pavements warm to melt the snow. So looking at the scale of things for direct use, and see it's far larger capacity than we were talking about the electricity use, which was around 15 gigawatts, where China alone on this graph is showing 40.6 gigawatts of thermal geothermal being utilized. But this graph is including the shallow geothermal heat pumps. And so when we look at the same scale and the same data, but this time don't include the shallow geothermal, you see that China is still the world leader, but it's a much lower figure. The United States, Sweden, and Germany have all completely dropped off the graph now, and Turkey has moved up to second place, followed by Japan, Iceland, and quite a bit lower down, Hungary. Iceland is the world leader per capita by far for direct heat utilization, 7 megawatts thermal energy per 1,000 people. The second place is actually Sweden at 0.67 megawatts of thermal energy per 1,000 people. So now thinking through time, direct use has obviously been used for bathing for centuries, millennia even. But the world's first district heating system was actually installed in France in the 14th century. And it's basically taking a hot spring that was located on a hillside above a village and utilizing wooden pipes and simple taps that supplied all the homes in that village with hot water. A more modern system, and probably the most famous district heating system, is Reykjavik in Iceland, installed in 1930 and producing to this day. Now thinking about electricity, geothermal electricity developed through time. The first geothermal power plant is Larderello, already mentioned, but this is a dry steam plant, so it uses steam directly from the drilled wells to drive a turbine and produce electricity. The next sort of technological development was to utilize wet steam, and this is a technology called flashing, where the steam and water mixture is plunged into cold water at low pressure. This produces a lot of steam, and that is what is used to drive a turbine. New Zealand's Warrinki is a very significant plant. It's producing to this day, but it's actually probably not the first flashing power plant, although it is often quoted as such. The first is actually probably located in Congo for a small plant that powered a mine there. Geysers is the largest geothermal power plant complex in the world. In Russia was the next sort of technology development, looking where they developed a binary power plant. And this is basically using a secondary fluid that has heat exchanged to it from the reservoir fluid. And this secondary fluid has a lower boiling point And so at lower temperatures, you can create geothermal electricity by this method. The first combined heat and power plant is in Iceland. This is basically a power plant whose waste heat was used in a district heating system to heat homes. And then more recently, technology has advanced to enhance geothermal systems, and we'll be talking about Soultz in France in a bit more detail later. Moving on to our case studies now. These are all power plant case studies. So we're talking electricity here. And as we've just mentioned, Larderello is the first geothermal power plant in the world. And just before the power plant, the first electricity generated by geothermal managed to power a light bulb in 1904, or rather 5 light bulbs all at once. The first power plant was then commissioned in 1913, and it had a capacity of 250 kilowatts. And it produced from 2 wells with fluids at 200 and 250 degrees C. By 1940, capacity had grown to 130 megawatts, and it powered the Italian railway system before World War II. It was destroyed in the war, and plants were rebuilt in 1948 and have been producing ever since. And today, the complex capacity is 526 megawatts. That's from 21 plants across 180 wells, and it produces just under 2% of Italy's energy. This next case study we're going to look at is the largest geothermal field in the world, the Geysers, USA. Slightly disappointingly, there aren't any geysers at the Geysers location, so this is stolen from Yellowstone. But in 1960, the first power plant was set up here, and then there were a total of 4 plants by the end of that decade. And basically, we've just seen an increase in power plants through time here, all producing from this one field. But the production history has been somewhat convoluted. So it's peaked 22 power plants. There's now 18 of those are producing. So from 1960 till 1980, we saw production here rise to 500 megawatts. Then by the late 1980s, it actually surpassed 1,500 megawatts before there's a steep decline that you can see on this graph, for somewhat stabilizing and leveling out since 1995 and showing just a very slow decline since then. And the purple line is showing injection into the field of water to basically stop depleting the reservoir so much. The current capacity is around 725 megawatts. So our next case study, we're looking to Iceland. And the Iceland deep drilling project, the first well, is actually the well that has reached the highest geothermal temperature by any geothermal well, 450 degrees centigrade. But it failed in its objective to reach supercritical conditions because it hit a shallow magma chamber. The second well, however, managed to reach supercritical conditions. And this is sort of a frontier area exploiting even more energy-packed resource than conventional geothermal. And this well has had problems with its well stability and casing, but in testing has proved to be up to 20 times more productive than a standard geothermal well. And so there is significant potential for massive energy utilization drilling into supercritical conditions, which is very interesting. Next case study, we're going to France, and we're talking about enhanced geothermal system here. In Soultz, this is a well drilled through the Upper Rhine Graben sedimentary basin and down into the fractured granite below. The pilot project started back in 1987. Originally, the wells were drilled to 2 kilometers depth to the first zone of fractured granite, and various testing was carried out for many years. The wells were then extended in depth, and more testing carried out, and then extended further to around 5 kilometers depth, where since 2010 they have been producing and powering this power plant, a 1.5 megawatt power plant commissioned 2010. The most recent development in this area, because it's quite a pioneering project and scheme, is it's now testing modular small-scale ORC binary machines, which are basically mini binary power plants. One of the challenges with geothermal energy is the very high upfront costs. And one of the main costs is the power plant, and so being able to reduce the upfront cost by modularizing power plants is a development that could see geothermal used in more places in the future. And so now the capacity here is 1.7 megawatts due to these small scale binary unit additions. That was one of the earliest EGS projects. There were then a couple in Germany and various others in the US and Australia. But most recently, there's been this project in the UK, called the United Downs Deep Geothermal Project. And it involves 2 wells, one drilled to 2,500 meters, and this is an injector, so putting cold water or warm water into the system, which is a fault zone. And then we have a producing well for 4,500 meters depth, and its reservoir temperature is around 190 degrees C. By the time these reach the power plant, they're at 175 degrees C. So this is in Cornwall of the United Kingdom, and there was a power purchase agreement signed just in January of this year. So the first geothermal electricity into the UK national grid, which is very exciting. There's also a plan for the wastewater from this project to provide heating for the world's first rum distillery powered by geothermal energy, and I very much hope that that happens. Just in the news yesterday, it was announced that Eden Project drilling is commencing. This is another Cornish granite geothermal project, and the first well, started drilling yesterday, and it will probably be about 5 months' time till we hear the results of that. Also, earlier this month, Arup released their Deep Geothermal Energy report on the UK, and within this report they identified around 360 locations that can be utilized for geothermal energy, and most of these were for heat, but in the report it said up to 50 megawatts of electricity could be generated through geothermal in the UK, but really significantly over 3,600 megawatts of thermal energy can be generated in the UK. And I want to see government incentives pushing this, and this can, not just for the UK, but for on a global scale, the geothermal potential for supplying renewable heat is absolutely massive. And continuing to talk about the future now, there's lots of technological advancements happening, from repurposing hydrocarbon wells to extracting lithium as part of the geothermal system to improve the economics, to Google using AI analysis of geothermal systems, and advanced drilling techniques such as basically using laser-assisted drilling. And that's been tested since 2015. And it looks like the results show that basically drilling can be up to 4 times faster through ultra-hard rock using this technique. But we're going to talk a bit more about enhanced geothermal systems. And we've mentioned a couple of these with the French project and United Downs, but what actually are they? And so they were formerly known as hot dry rock. It's basically a hot rock reservoir, but without the permeability that is required for a hydrothermal system. And EGS basically involves enhancing the fracture system in these hot rocks. It's often said to be different to fracking, in that they use the thermal properties of cold water on the hot rock, contracting the rocks, and this is what opens up the fractures as opposed to pressure. But there are companies using all or attempting to use all techniques really to enhance geothermal systems. Part of the problem with this is a risk that it's going to be successful, but also there is risk of seismicity, of course, as we know from the fracking industry. And one sort of new development in this area to get around those challenges called advanced geothermal systems. And this is basically another way of getting the energy out of hot, dry rock, and it's through closed-loop systems. And so Greenfire Energy are a company that have been developing in this sphere. They're the first one I was aware of. In 2019, they've had a demonstration plant in California, and it's basically using a coaxial well where cool water flows down around the center tube to collect and collects heat, and then it flows up the center of the insulated tube. And it's this system that never comes in contact with the reservoir fluid, and it's this closed loop system that drives the turbines or supplies heat for transfer. There's other companies working in this sphere: Serify Energy based in the UK, Rock Energy based in Norway. They're using this sort of technology for direct heating of Oslo Airport. It's one of their projects that's up and running. But this Greenfire Energy have also got a concept for basically a U-shaped well, which involves drilling horizontally through an area of hot, dry rock. They're not particularly progressing this idea at the moment. They're focusing on retrofitting non-productive wells with coaxial ones. However, Evor are progressing this concept further. They have had a pilot project that was successful in Canada, and this year is the first commercial project that they're undertaking in southern Germany. It's basically a concept for multiple horizontal wells, which require very accurate directional drilling, which is incredible, and technology that's only become recently available, really, because of innovations made in the oil and gas sector. These two companies, big oil companies, have invested in Evor's technology. Another company in this sphere is Sage Geosystems. I'll not mention them in detail for time, but basically these closed loop systems are opening up a new area of geothermal utilization, and many companies are wanting to utilize this closed loop technology, such as Causeway Geothermal in Ireland. So this is a graph from IRENA, and we're looking at how competitive is geothermal energy. So it's a bit of an overwhelming graph, but basically this gray patch is the fossil fuel cost range. On the y-axis, we have the levelized cost of energy, and all these dots are different geothermal power plants, basically showing that conventional geothermal is already competitive. There's only two of these dots, so not exactly a large sample size, but two of these dots are from enhanced geothermal systems. From these two examples, they are competitive. So this enhanced or advanced geothermal systems can be competitive, but we need more pilot studies, and we need to see more demonstrations of this technology. So what's the future of geothermal? Well, in areas where there's conventional resource that is yet to be utilized, certainly for geothermal electricity generation can happen in these locations, as well as more in the areas in dark blue on this map that already utilize geothermal energy for electricity. But really, on a global scale, everywhere can utilize geothermal heating far more than they do currently, basically. And that, I believe, is the future of geothermal, is to revolutionize heating. So this is just showing the power plants that we have in TROVE and the thermal plants as well, for the locations that we cover that for. And mentioning one project that was basically another area of technology advancements, which is Clark Lake in Canada. And this is the using of wells in a depleted hydrocarbon field and repurposing them for geothermal use. So this will be Canada's first electric geothermal power plant. And it was just in the news last week, which is why I've included it here. But yes, there's many exciting developments, and a geothermal revolution may be just around the corner. And this is my cue to transition to our demonstration of the TROVE knowledge base. So TROVE is basically packaged within Microsoft Excel. It's effectively an app within Excel that we have developed. All the data for TROVE Geothermal can all be accessed in one table, can be pulled into GIS systems, as I saw on the last slide of my presentation there. But for the knowledge base element of TROVE, we've divided it into 3 regions. So we have one that covers geothermal in the Americas, one that covers geothermal in Europe, and one that covers the rest of the world. And this is Geothermal Europe that we'll be looking at. So to dive straight into the data table, you can see that this is our list of assets here. And I'll just talk you through the columns that we cover, basically. So we cover asset type, defining whether it's for deep geothermal heating or a power plant or a complex. We cover the geological setting, the resource type that this asset is located on, and then some details on the technology. Because it's Excel, you can search and filter it any which way you like. So here I've just typed in flash under technology, and so all the technologies that include flashing have now been filtered, and you can see it's just from these 5 countries that technology is employed. I'll just clear the filter again. We capture whether it's direct or electricity or used for both, whether an asset is producing or just in the planning phase or cancelled, where assets are located. There are lat longs for plotting into GIS, who the operator is, and then we cover details on the power plant itself or on the thermal plant. In cases of power plants, we capture turbine manufacturers and link to grid details, number of units, and in the case of thermal plants, it's just the thermal capacity. We capture first power generated, and then information on the wells that are used, and information on the reservoir. So this can be particularly useful for estimating sort of costs that a project might need, looking at the average reservoir depth and the lithology of the reservoir as well, how hard it's going to be to drill through. Also capture average reservoir temperatures. But that's not all that TROVE is. We call TROVE a knowledge base because it's not only data in a table, but you can also click on any asset and you'll be taken to an asset summary page or overview page. And this is basically a collation of all the public domain data that we've used to build the data table. And all of it is linked, so you can copy these, paste them into Google, and you're taken directly to the original source. And this includes stuff that you can't tabulate, such as power plant layouts, maps of the geology or the thermal resources and schematics of the well setup. And that's what you'll find when you click on any of these assets, just seeing a summary of the data, what's available. So here we look at a power plant setup, some nice pictures of it as well. And yeah, just for any of these plants, that is what you get. This is a Netherlands one, and we can see a pepper here. So this is direct heat used for greenhouses. And we believe that TROVE is the most comprehensive geothermal database out there. We have recently been developing a sort of a country high-level summary version of this asset database, and so this is now looking at countries in Europe to give an overview of their sort of geothermal status. And I won't go through the columns this time, but covering stuff like the general reservoirs and developers and whether there's funding schemes. At the high level, we can see, is geothermal electricity generated in this country, yes or no? What's the primary geothermal use? And what stage of electrical geothermal development are we at, whether it's a prototype or none at all or commercially developed? And for any of these, again, you click on the asset tab and you'll see stuff such as heat maps for the country, maybe maps where the plants are located, and basically write-ups and all the public domain material. And I'll just click on another for an example. So it's Czech Republic, again, seeing heat maps and reports and write-ups. And so basically TROVE is a huge time-saving and cost-saving device. It's an excellent screening tool, and it's more than just a database. There is nothing quite like TROVE. And by subscribing to TROVE, actually, you can help drive development as well. For example, you could suggest where you wanted the next district heating system to be included, from what country, and stuff like that, because we want TROVE to serve the geothermal industry and be as useful as possible. But that's all I was wanting to say. So I will hand back to Rose.
And thank you everyone who tuned in today. Just a quick reminder of our final webinar next week. We have time now for a few questions. Any questions we don't have time to answer today, we will answer them online and they'll be available from tomorrow. So I'll jump into the questions now. We have a question here asking, do you think the development of geothermal is happening quick enough to be a major player for us decarbonising our economy?
I guess on the global level, I would say the geothermal technology is there to decarbonize economies rapidly, particularly in the area of heating. For almost all countries have very significant potential in this area. Whether it's actually happening fast enough, no, it's probably not right now, and we need more government incentives. We need more basically utilization of the technology that we already have. But is it possible? Yes, definitely. And things like the Arup report that we shared about for the UK are really pushing things in the right direction, and hopefully governments get the right idea and we can utilize geothermal to decarbonize basically our economies. Yeah.
Thank you, Ben. We have another question here. What kind of papers or research are you linking in the system, meaning TROVE?
Sure, yes. So this is all public domain information. So nothing in TROVE is confidential. So the papers would be, for example, from the World Geothermal Congress. Many of these are available on platforms such as ResearchGate or other open source areas, but other papers released from company websites, and just a whole variety of sources, basically.
Another TROVE-based question here. Do we have any cost data or days to drill or complete a hole?
Not tabulated as yet. However, we are looking to include something like a levelized cost of energy on an asset by asset basis, but this isn't yet included. At a high level, in some of the country summaries, it will be talked about in the reports that we capture, but not within the data table as yet.
Perfect. There's, I think, time for one more question. I'll just finish up here with this one. There is quite a lot of talk about using water from disused mines, for example, district heating. Do you hold data for where there are suitable disused mines for this purpose, or where it is being considered?
We do hold data for some very selective mine water projects. So, for example, there's a pilot project in Glasgow at the moment, and there's another potential project sort of northern England. I think there's another in Wales as well, but not in the sort of overall. We don't hold data for where it's not been publicly considered. So just the projects that are actually ongoing, and only in countries where we're including the direct heat utilization at the moment.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you everyone for all your questions and for such great interaction. But I think we will leave it there for today, and we hope to see you next week for the hydrogen webinar. So thank you everyone again.
Thanks everyone. Bye.
Well, hope you enjoyed our video. There's more in the series, so go to our channel and you'll find there lots of information on oil and gas assets from around the world, as well as the renewables. So look forward to seeing you back on our channel soon.